GeForce RTX 40 series cards are one of the most ambiguous GPUs of what we've seen for the last couple of years. Despite providing a good generational advantage, RTX 40 series is doing a lot of stuff wrong, and today we'll try to explain it by overviewing RTX 4080 and testing it against its predecessor RTX 3080 as an example. Hello, and welcome back to Hardware Lab. Before talking about Ada Lovelace, let's remember Ampere. Ampere GPUs from Nvidia were not a pleasant surprise in terms of pricing policy, and I don't think most of you will argue with that. But what can be worse than purchasing the overpriced product with planned obsolescence? Yes, this was also the case with RTX 30 series, and obviously I'm talking about VRAM buffer limitation on high-end models, starting with RTX 3060 Ti. Did Ada Lovelace GPUs solve any of these problems? In fact, it made them even worse. We're already aware that RTX 4060 and 4060 Ti will get the same 8GB VRAM buffer as RTX 3070 or as GTX 1070 had back in the days. And the prices. Well, our RTX 4080 that we're benchmarking today has the official release price of 1199 quid in the UK, while 80 class GPUs had never cost over 650. Yes, even including RTX 3080. All that with only a 16GB buffer on a board. It sounds alright in general, but do you really think that this buffer is acceptable at this price class? This a bit messy introduction is here for you to get the point about pricing and limitation policy that is present on the market, and I'm afraid to say it's unlikely to change in the nearest future. More about that later in this video, and now let's take a look at the technical achievements of Ada Lovelace and appreciate the engineering work that is undoubtedly very impressive. Memory subsystem is one of the most important factors in GPUs and CPUs, and Ada Lovelace chips got a huge update of it. Aside from increasing the buffer for 80% over RTX 3080, RTX 4080 has a gorgeous advantage in the cache buffer. When RTX 3080 has 5MB of L2 cache, RTX 4080 has 64, almost 13 times more. The cache improvement was a necessity during Ada Lovelace development, since this is an obvious trend for GPU direction for one major reason: ray tracing. I hope you've watched our video about that, and you know that ray tracing requires some acceleration methods to run with decent performance. One of these is bounded volume hierarchy, or just BVH. BVH structure should be stored somewhere, and performance of a game running with turned-on ray tracing can be directly affected by storage bandwidth. Yeah, there's a bunch of other data that is stored in larger cache, but BVH is something very sensitive to storing megabytes of rapidly accessible data. Taking a look at what AMD has done with RX 6000 series and implementation of a third level cache and further accelerating that multiple times in RX 7000 series, it looks like it was bearing fruit for AMD all along, despite being significantly slower at BVH calculations. Major and obvious improvement over Ampere cards is a new 4nm TSMC technology over the 8nm Samsung used previously. This allowed Ada Lovelace to become the most energy efficient cards ever. Despite that, this generation is one of the most power consuming, with 4080's official TDP at 320 watts and 4090's at a scary 450 watts. And this is actually the point where we need to talk about the transistor budget. RTX 4080 has its own chip with 46 million transistors, while RTX 3080 is produced by Cutting 3090 chips, which only have 28 million. So the performance you get on the latest cards hardly relies on a raised amount of transistors. Combine that with a pretty slow production technology improvement and growing price as a result, and it will perfectly explain the efficiency of this approach. This is the reason why power consumption is elevating again and again, and your GPUs are getting bigger. The way of performance improvement by purely raising the number of transistors doesn't work anymore, and production of these GPUs is somewhat really expensive. But is there a better way to design a GPU to make it more efficient? Sort of. If you take a look at AMD, they are working on splitting resources inside the GPU to multiple chips called chiplets. This is how L3 cache is done on Radeon RX 7000 series. In fact, AMD had the right ideas about chiplet design even from Fury X and Zen 1 times. However, before 7000 series, it was never really a big success on the GPU market. Still, AMD's smart ideas in terms of chip production don't mean they are not suffering from exactly the same stupid pricing problems. Anyway, this video is not about AMD. Can we find anything better than silicon in a few future years? It doesn't look like it's gonna happen, but it also doesn't mean that progress should be that slow. Maybe we'll see some more smart solutions like AMD's chiplet designs in the near future, but if not, then expect both prices and TDPs to grow even higher. About the positives, Ada Lovelace has a 3rd generation ray tracing cores and 4th generation tensor cores. We won't go deep at their technical advantage in this video, but it's worth mentioning that ray tracing operation with the same amount of gigaраys per second should be computed faster. With the tensor cores, things are a little more interesting. 4th generation tensor cores allowed the use of DLSS 3.0 technology, which includes a frame generation option. We have a dedicated video about DLSS 2.0 issues and why it doesn't provide free FPS as it's usually believed, but for sure, we're glad to test this feature for ourselves. Before a benchmarking section, there are a few essential things to be noted. Since our team is spread across the globe, we cannot share the hardware between each other. Also, our financial situation doesn't allow us to buy specific PC components that are desired for running tests. That's why we regularly have some limitations in terms of testing methodology. This time the GPUs were benchmarked on my own rig with Ryzen 7 5800X and motherboard that only supports PCI Express 3.0. Most of you would say it's not a big deal, but in cases of VRAM bottleneck it actually is. All the games are run in 2160p, which is 4K. The first section with rasterized performance and the second one with RT performance. Starting with a pretty modern but DirectX 11 title, and the results can be interpreted in a different manner. On one hand, a generational leap is here, it's obvious and it's good, but on the other, do you really think the price gap is worth it in this case? Another DX11 test with even smaller upper hand on 4080. I'd call it a bit disappointing. Next-gen game with DirectX 12 as a stock API strongly prefers the newer architecture. I mean, nothing unexpected, it should work like this, but in this test 4080 definitely doesn't look that dumb. Cyberpunk as well as the Plague Tale showcases the strong points of Ada Lovelace. Again, it's expected but not bad at all. Callisto Protocol follows the trend of the other new releases and demonstrates a relatively huge gap between the cards. This is especially representative in this case. 3080 does the drops under 30s and 4080 doesn't. Doom Eternal shows the greatest difference between the GPUs we've seen so long. Those of you who pay attention to the numbers already got it. Yup, 3080 got VRAM limited without any RT. I guess we should say sorry to these dude. Of course, generational leap is not bad. What is bad is price increase for the same 80 class card. I mean, should we even consider these GPUs as the same class? And if not, then the performance gap is disappointing. But it depends on perspective, so everybody can make his own conclusion at this point, I suppose. But what about upscaling and ray tracing? In theory, 4080 must crush its opponent using those technologies. Moreover, since ray tracing consumes some VRAM as well, 10 gigs of RTX 3080 can struggle. So here it is, a ray tracing test. DLSS was enabled here in most games in order to save some performance. Enabling both ray tracing and DLSS and Plague Tale Requiem runs much better on 4080 than in Doom, where 3080 is VRAM limited. Cyberpunk doesn't show any evidence of VRAM bottlenecking on 3080 in native 4K without ray tracing. With ray tracing it clearly does, even despite the usage of DLSS reconstruction with quality preset. So we're already at the point where even not really VRAM demanding games being struggling with 10GB buffer, let alone a native 4K render. We're not sure if we were actually CPU limited on RTX 4080 in Callisto Protocol. Sensor may strangely report GPU underload in this game sometimes, but I don't really think that it works that bad on 5800X. Is 4080 significantly faster than its predecessor in this game? Yes, and this advantage has nothing to do with VRAM bottleneck. I'm a bit tired of mentioning the VRAM issue again and again, so I guess you know what's wrong here. Still, the numbers are quite fun to look at. One more game that does not appreciate the 10GB buffer in 4K DLSS quality and shows some major dominance on 4080 with some gorgeous RT implementations. There is no need for a VRAM bottlenecking for Metro Exodus' extremely well-made full ray tracing GI and DLSS to prefer newer RT and Tensor cores of Ada Lovelace and show a really significant boost on the 4080 side. The last game in RT test that's fully loaded with ray tracing effects runs way better on 4080 than most of the Rasterized games, especially the X11 ones. We did not really expect 10GB of VRAM to be such a major factor in this test. Anyway, the recent architecture of 4080 is pretty convincing even without mentioning the VRAM issue. The newer card is more likely to win in the newer games with DirectX 12 instead of 11, and especially if some ray tracing or DLSS reconstruction is applied. Can we consider RTX 4080 as a good choice? This question is food for thought, but again, remember all that price and class mess we discussed in the introduction. The only thing that we've not covered yet is the frame generation technology, available with DLSS 3.0. So let's run one of the latest games featured frame gen and test it out. If you thought of frame generation as some magic that doubles frame rate, we have to admit that it doesn't live up to expectations. It doesn't, since it still requires some time to run. Keep in mind that these generated frames have nothing to do with the game engine, so latency while using a frame gen is close to the one that you have on the half of the frame rate you see. Still, it can be a useful feature in a lot of scenarios, and with all the updates, it works pretty well. As we've said earlier, it's always your choice whether the upgrade and price increase is worth it or it isn't. However, the trends present on market are definitely not customer friendly. This generation of both AMD and Nvidia cards shows us clearly that old methods to upgrade the abilities of GPUs simply don't work anymore, so engineers should find new ways to maintain the performance growth rate. Oh yeah, and VRAM shortage is an obvious problem. We're not discovering America with this statement, but remember that VRAM limited cards last significantly shorter than the ones that have a proper future-oriented VRAM subsystems. That's it for now. If you enjoyed these benchmarks and overview and watched the video till the end, why shouldn't you consider subscribing to the Hardware Lab and joining our Discord server through the link in the description? And as usual, stay up to date with HL.